On this Feast of All Saints, I want to ask a simple question. What does it mean to be a saint? Okay, it isn't a simple question. I say that because what your definition of a saint is may well vary from someone else's. And every time we see a statue or a painting of some image of a saint, it's representation of one person's image of what a saint is. An example would be St. Francis. I might say, well, what are you? I'm a Franciscan. What does that mean? I'm a follower of St. Francis. You know who he is? Sometimes people say, well, no. I say, well, he's the guy in the bird bath. And that's one image of St. Francis. But in my office, I have a statue about like this, tall as someone gave me, with St. Francis embracing a leper. That's a different image. Or of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Some people like the pastel colors with her arms folded and her eyes gazing into heaven. And it talks of a very prayerful Mary in touch with God. That's one image. Another image is that of Mary standing at the foot of the cross. Different image, isn't it? So, it's not an easy question. So, how might we answer? One answer that I often come across, and in my reading was it says, the most common answer was, well, a saint is someone who's holy. As if that helps. What does it mean to be holy? And usually, right after holy, it means to become like God. Well, in the Psalms it says, there is one who is holy and one only, and that is God. So that means that I'm not. And if some are called to holiness, well, those are the extraordinary few who are called to be saints. And obviously, that doesn't include me, so I'm off the hook. I don't have to try to be a saint. So I don't find that particularly helpful. Because we might think of a saints, like modern-day saints, like Mother Teresa, or Pope John Paul II, or Pope John the 23rd. You know, it's like, well, they are so far above me, I'm never going to get there, so that's good for them, but I'm just an ordinary person. All right, that doesn't really help much. What helps me the most is a definition that I've come across and kind of hold on to, and that's this. That a saint is someone who faithfully follows Christ. And I like that because it gives some content to what a saint is. You want to know what a saint is? You look at Christ. There are plenty of examples in the gospel of who he is, what he said, what he believed in, what he lived for, died for, and rose again for, that we might know what it means to be a saint. You look at him. They faithfully follow Christ. But I like to add a little different touch to that whole thing. I would rather say that a saint is someone who seeks to faithfully follow Christ. We seek that out. And Christ becomes the focus of who we are in life. And we might say, yeah, but I don't do that perfectly. Well, nobody does. Nobody does. Ask if you could ask the saints that went before us, say, well, they would be the first to say, I didn't do it perfectly either. We all fail. In a meditation book I used in the last century, decades ago, and used several times, it's kind of tattered by now. It's called We Die Standing Up by Dom Hubert von Zeller. And in that book, there's a chapter on sanctity. And he talks about this thing about failing. And I like it so much, I'm going to read it to you. It says, someone who's seeking to be a saint. Of course, he will fail. It is not his failures that disqualify him, nor they do not even seriously discourage him. It is only if he were content to fail that his sanctity would be imperiled. But the true saint is never content to fail. He knows that he is liable to fail. And I like this. He accounts it a mercy of God that he doesn't fail more often. He is humbled, but not unconsolable when he has failed. He never accepts his failure with a shrug-shouldered indifference. telling himself that, after all, everyone else does much the same thing and he can be expected to be perfect, so he gives up. But what he needs to do is to return to God and refocus upon Christ to become more like him. And we heard in that second reading, it says, I love that reading, it says, "Beloved, we are God's children now. What we shall later be has not yet been revealed, but we are God's children now." Including, we are God's children now in our own faults and in our sinfulness. We belong to God. He claims us as his. Can you imagine? He claims us as his now. And we are also God's children now in all of the good things, all the gifts, all the love that we have to share with one another. We are God's children now. So we, being here as followers of Christ, are on the road to sanctity at different stages of the road, I would guess. Instead of kind of wondering what a saint is or kind of dismissing it, maybe we need to take it seriously. And there's some more content to what a saint is in the Beatitudes we see today. We'll talk about some of them. Blessed are the poor in spirit. There's a reason that this beatitude is first, because poor in spirit doesn't mean material poverty necessarily. There's no virtue in just material poverty. But rather, being poor in spirit means that we trust and rely upon God. We look to God and rely upon him for all that is good. We don't seek to get along just by our own merits. We know our own weaknesses. We look to God. And that's what Jesus did. You'll find in the gospel many examples of him going in the middle of the night to pray. Why did he do that? He needed to be in connection, in relationship with his Father. We're called to be poor in spirit, to look to him in all things. Can we be poor in spirit? Can we look to God in all things? Blessed are those who mourn. Everyone has sadness in their life for themselves, for their loved ones, things to grieve about, sufferings that people go through, losses. But it means just more than that too. It means, blessed are those who care enough to grieve, to mourn over the injustices and the sufferings of the world. To be moved by that and maybe moved to action. I remember a movie I saw decades ago in the last century. It was called The Ugly American. And in that movie, I think it was around the Vietnam time. But anyway, the movie was depicting a Southeast Asian country was being invaded, and we had something to do with some of the things that went wrong as a country. And at the end of the movie, the ambassador had gotten out safely, and we had seen a lot of terrible images in there, and the ambassador was being interviewed, and he said, "Well, what do you have to say to the American people?" And he said, "We've made some mistakes here, and people have suffered, and we've been in the midst of our trying to do good. So what I have to say to the American people, what I hope we learn from this is," and the camera panned away, and you saw a family watching the TV, and he says, "What we hope we need to learn from this is," that guy got up and shut off the TV and yawned and went to bed. Shocking ending. Blessed are those who mourn, who grieve over the evil and suffering in the world. They care enough. Blessed are the meek. Always had a trouble with that word. What does that mean? Well, I found a definition this time that makes some sense to me. It says the meek, they are people who are calm, humble, and steadfast in the face of adversity. That means when things go wrong, we don't blow up and come in there with our fists wailing and yelling and screaming. It's like, okay, things have gone wrong. How can I be calm, humble, and steadfast in all this? We have faith in God's presence in our lives. That's possible How well do we do that? We can do that by God's grace. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. That hungering and thirsting for righteousness is first of all a hunger and thirst for God in our relationship with Him, to be closer to Him, and through our love for Him, realizing His love for us, through our love for Him, we express that love by serving others, whether or not we think they deserve it. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the merciful. A person who is merciful is someone who understands the faults, the weaknesses, and the needs of other people. And they take that into account because they understand their own faults and weaknesses and needs. And there are times, for a merciful person, there are times when we know that someone else needs to be held to accountability. And even more importantly, we know that there are times we need to give a guy a break. And let him know that we understand. And let him off the hook. Just do one more. Blessed are the peacemakers. We can't be peacemakers unless we have peace inside of here. And if we find ourselves blowing up over trivial matters, there's something wrong in here. For example, if we're driving down the street behind a wheel, and we blow up and let our feelings be known, and minor mistakes, and mistakes of other people, check it out. Or if somebody says, you're yelling a lot lately, check it out. Peacemakers in here, so that we can be peacemakers with others. Could go on with a few more, but we are called to be children. We are God's children now. We are called to be saints, meaning on the road to following Christ. We are following Him. Sometimes we fall down, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we're better at it by God's grace. And so we are called to be those kinds of saints. Maybe you've known some. I'm sure you have. A little later on in that chapter on sanctity, Dom Hubert von Zeller says this: the beauty of this saint life is that it can be embarked upon at any moment. We don't have to wait for a miracle. The grace is there. Today. Now.